We are breaking down the critical fair housing violations of steering, blockbusting, and redlining for the national portion of the real estate exam. Steering occurs when a real estate licensee limits a buyer's options or directs them toward or away from specific neighborhoods based on their inclusion in a protected class. On your exam, look for scenarios where an agent says something like, "I think you would be more comfortable in this neighborhood because there are more people like you there." Even if the agent believes they are being helpful or providing good service, this is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. The test often tries to trick you by making the agent's intent seem positive, but remember that intent does not matter if the action results in a discriminatory outcome. Steering can also happen digitally if a licensee filters property searches for a client based on demographic data rather than the client's specific property requirements. Blockbusting, also known as panic selling, is the practice of inducing property owners to sell their homes by claiming that the entry of a protected class into the neighborhood will lead to a decline in property values or an increase in crime. When you see a question where a licensee is going door to door, telling neighbors they should list their homes now before the neighborhood changes, that is blockbusting. The exam will focus on the fact that the licensee is motivated by a desire to generate commissions through fear. A common trap is confusing blockbusting with steering. The easiest way to keep them straight is to remember that blockbusting targets the seller, while steering targets the buyer. It is the act of encouraging the seller to jump ship or panic. Redlining is a practice primarily associated with lenders and insurance companies rather than real estate agents. This happens when a financial institution refuses to provide loans or insurance policies in a specific geographic area based on the racial or ethnic composition of that neighborhood. On the exam, redlining is often depicted as a lender drawing a literal or figurative red line on a map and refusing to lend to anyone inside that area, regardless of their individual creditworthiness. You must recognize that redlining is about the location of the property and the demographics of the area, rather than the qualifications of the borrower. To help you remember these three concepts, use the phrase steer the buyer, bust the seller, and redline the map. This mental shortcut ensures you identify the correct party being affected in any exam scenario. Another frequent exam trap involves questions about who can be held liable. For steering and blockbusting, the individual licensee and their sponsoring broker are usually the focus. For redlining, the focus shifts to the lending institution. Be prepared for questions that ask you to identify which federal law these practices violate, which is the Fair Housing Act of 1968. You might also see questions asking about the exemptions to the Fair Housing Act, but remember that there are never any exemptions when it comes to racial discrimination or these three specific illegal practices in a professional brokerage context. Even if a property is technically exempt under the Mrs. Murphy exemption for small rentals, a real estate licensee can never engage in steering or blockbusting because the moment a professional licensee is involved, the exemption usually vanishes for that transaction. Mastery of these terms requires you to look past the narrative of the question and identify the specific action being taken. If the licensee is influencing a buyer's choice based on race, religion, or national origin, it is steering. If the licensee is scaring a seller into listing because of a demographic shift, it is blockbusting. If a lender is excluding a whole neighborhood due to its makeup, it is redlining. Focusing on the target of the action will guide you to the correct answer every time.